Hello and welcome to the Game Changers podcast. I'm Sue Anstiss, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity and CEO of Promote PR, one of the UK's leading sports communications agencies. It's fantastic news that this series of the Game Changers is supported by Barclays and will focus on fearless women in football, reinforcing Barclays' huge commitment to the beautiful game. For nearly 2 decades, Barclays' partnership with the Premier League has seen it go from strength to strength, and the bank has also invested heavily in supporting football in the community. Now, as the new title sponsor of the Barclays FA Women's Super League, and with Barclays' commitment to giving every girl access to football in schools by 2024, the bank's giving women and girls the opportunity to grow through the game too. As you'll hear from my next guest, ensuring women and girls around the world have access to football has been a huge part of her life. Maggie Murphy became the Women's General Manager at Lewes FC last year. It's an extraordinary football club with massive ambitions, the first club in the world to pay its male and female players equally. Maggie's had a fascinating career path, having worked for Amnesty International on human rights issues, Transparency International, the world's largest anti-corruption organisation, and the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, where she was Director of Public Policy and Sport Integrity. She's also the Director of Communications at Equal Playing Field, a charity dedicated to advancing women's equality in sport from grassroots to elite levels. I met Maggie at the Dripping Pan in Lewes, the beautiful stadium where the football club train and play. We sat in the stands with amazing views of the pitch, the club's beach hut corporate boxes, and the rolling hills of the South Downs. You can even hear the seagulls in the background as we talk. Maggie said that football is her game, so I asked her what happens to her when she plays football. How does it make her feel?
I don't think anyone's ever asked me that, and I think that the funny thing is it makes you feel nothing. And I say that because you forget everything. When you're on the pitch, when you're running around, the only thing you can think of is that you're playing and that you need to be in a particular position, or that you've just screwed up a shot, or someone's shouting at you for something. So I think that it's one of those experiences that actually you forget a lot of other things out there. I'm at the same time, obviously, I'm very competitive when I'm on the pitch, and so I think I was quite well known for, even if we were 4-0 down with 3 minutes to go, I still thought that maybe we could still win. So I'd be the one that'd be like, come on! And so, yeah, definitely that kind of level of competition, but never giving up. That was always something that was part of my game as well.
And how did it feel as a girl playing football when really you were surrounded by it as a sport for boys growing up?
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't really have any opportunity to play. So the times that I did get to play were either in the garden with brothers or cousins, or next door neighbours, or when school, would put in that once a year there'd be a tournament and all the sporty girls would be like, right, we're doing this football tournament, are you in? And you'd be like, okay, yeah. So I was never really conscious of not being allowed, because I was always allowed more or less to play in the garden, as long as my brothers might make me go and goal for a while.
Are they older than you?
I've got 2 older, 1 younger and 1 younger sister as well, so a big family. So it was always big and boisterous, and I don't think anyone was when you've got such a big family, there's fewer rules, and so there's no one that's really inhibiting you from doing something. So I don't think that, I think it was only later that my consciousness kind of set in, and I was like, but why am I not allowed to play? Or why are people making decisions about whether I can play or not? And so a couple of times at school, and then obviously a lot later in university, and when I started playing so there wasn't any girls football teams, but at the age of about 13, I ended up playing for the only women's football team on the Isle of Wight.
How did that feel to be playing with women at that time? Is that when you were more conscious of
So it was down to a teacher in particular. I think I had a bit of a moan one time and said, why are there no girls teams? Like, I love this sport. I loved all sports, but I really liked football. I really you throw yourself in and it's quite physical, and I hated how precise everything was in netball and how you had to, 2 yards back. And I was like, but I want that ball. I want to get stuck in. So when this one teacher said to me, well, okay, fine, yeah, there aren't any girls teams, but there is a women's football team, you should go there. And I was like, oh, can't do that, I'm just a little girl. But I ended up going along and just threw myself in. And I was conscious that I was young. At that time, it was proper grassroots football, so there were players in their teens, 20s, 30s and 40s. Oh, okay. So I was young, but I'm also a little bit stubborn maybe, and just didn't think, well, that's, I was playing well and that was fine. But definitely sometimes our football association would decide whether we were allowed to go and play games, like tournaments and I just felt like sometimes we were stopped from playing, and I didn't understand why these anonymous old men in suits were kind of not allowing us to play when they hadn't come to talk to us about it, and whether we wanted to play. So I think that's probably when the consciousness started to seep in, and then definitely at university I saw lots of inequalities, and that was frustrating then.
And was that in your beautiful stadium at the Dripping Pan? I think you played here as a child, I believe.
Yeah, actually that was my first ever game. My first ever 11-a-side game of football was at this ground that we're looking at right now.
A lovely sort of circular history to come back here.
So strange, yeah, so circular. And I remember, the funny thing about that game was that I was too young to play. At the time, you had to be 14 to play adult football, so I played under somebody else's name. And then I scored 3 goals. I scored 2 up there and 1 in there. And I still remember it. Back in that time, this stand didn't exist. The stand that we're sitting in at the moment wasn't here. It was a long wooden shed. So I have these memories imprinted. And when I came here for the first time, as an adult, I said to somebody, this looks different. Was there a long wooden green shed? No. Yes, yeah, exactly. I think I played twice here, but I remember the first time because it was my first ever game.
And you talked about playing then and playing at university. Did you ever consider playing professionally? Was that an option for you?
So when I was about 16, I was in the regional squad. Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and we won the National Cup 2 years running. And at the time, our coaches, who were fantastic, one of the particular women, Julie Way, she said, there's this opportunity for getting a scholarship to go to the US. And I remember saying to her, oh no, you don't understand, I'm academic, that's not, sport is for other people. Playing football, no, sorry, that's what other people do. I'm going to be doing my GCSEs and I'm going to do my A-levels, and, I'll probably go to university. So for me, it was never really a career choice ever. And also I was quite happy with it being a separate thing. I always had a curiosity about other things, and for me, football was this brilliant thing that I did at the weekends. And I put a lot of effort and energy into it. It's obviously become a big part of my life now, but it was always something on the side. I was not super talented. I played well, I was always very effective, but I wasn't a really talented player. But if I had been growing up in a different part of the country, my history might have been quite different. Maybe if I was in close to a big club that had a proper training academy. For me, I ended up playing a few seasons with the Isle of Wight, and then I followed that coach over to play on the mainland. And so I had to take a boat to training, boat to home games, boat to away games. So for me to have really progressed as a teenager, I would have had to have lived somewhere else, yeah.
And you've had the most extraordinary career path, so not typical, potentially, for someone in football, but you've worked with Amnesty International and many other human rights organisations. I'm really interested to know where that passion for justice and equality and social change came from.
I don't really know, but I do know that it was there from the beginning. I would probably credit my parents, my family, for having that kind of sense of justice. Big Catholic family, so lots of principles and values kind of instilled from a young age. But I was always curious about the world, and I think I always wanted to go somewhere. So I took a year out before I went to university, and this is a bit embarrassing now, but I picked a country that I'd never heard of. And I spent about 9 months living in Tanzania, which is, and it was lovely, and I had such a wonderful time in that. Opened up my eyes to the world, and it made me value things like health and education in a way that I'd never really valued it, even though I'd gone through school and got good grades and things. But I think the justice thing, I think there is some inherent part of me that feels really strongly about fairness. And when I saw things that weren't fair, it would really get to me. Now when I reflect back, every so often, there are little things that I did when I was at school as a kid, or in my Saturday job, where I was like, oh wow, I took that on for the team, didn't I? Without, being aged 15 or 16. I'll give an example. There was, I remember this, I was working as a waitress in a kind of rubbishy bar restaurant. I was only about 15 or 16, and I'd been there for almost a year, Saturday job, and the new set of waitresses came in who were 15, and so I was 16 by this time, and I was on £3.60 minimum wage at the time, but the minimum wage was going to change, but it hadn't. This is a really long story, but it's really funny. And the new waitresses that came in were on £3.75, but we'd been there for a year and we were on £3.60. And eventually I was like, right, don't worry, team. I'll go and talk to the management. And I remember going, and I was quite nervous because, when you're 15 or 16, you don't really, it's not normal for you to challenge authority. Yeah. So I ended up kind of taking one of the managers to one side and saying, I didn't think this was particularly fair. And his response was, oh my gosh, of course, I'll bring them down to 360 immediately. And then immediately I was like, no. And I was like, oh my gosh, all the new waitresses are going to hate me. And I was like, no, you don't understand. This is...
What was the outcome in the end?
We were all given a raise to 375. I got that extra 15 pence an hour. But yeah, so I think I was often a spokesperson.
Yeah. And in terms of your career path, so what university, what did you study?
Yeah, so I went to Oxford University and studied French and linguistics. My third year, again, all my friends were going to Paris or to Nice or something. And I was like, wow, but I can go there anytime. So I ended up spending half the year in the French Caribbean, so a tiny little island, Guadeloupe. And then half the year I spent in Senegal, in West Africa. So again, I was trying to find other experiences. I've always been kind of curious about what else is out there, and just being very aware that if you've got time, you can use it to do really cool, exciting things. And you can go to Paris anytime.
And then from there, you did a master's as well?
Yeah, actually, I finished university and lived in Rwanda for a year. So being in Rwanda and seeing a country that was recovering from the genocide, that switched me into the human rights world, because they were doing a lot of things on stabilising the country and lots of educational initiatives and lots of health initiatives, and yet people couldn't speak freely. It suddenly switched me on. I was almost like, well, does education and health matter if you can't have a conversation about politics openly? And so from there, I started to do a lot more in human rights. Came back, did a master's at the London School of Economics. And so that was in international development, but it had a lot on kind of conflict and war, refugee issues, and obviously politics and economics. And from there, started to work in human rights.
You were almost 7 years at Transparency International. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that organisation and your roles there?
Yeah, so Transparency International is the world's biggest anti-corruption organisation. So lots of people know about Amnesty on human rights. Transparency International is kind of the equivalent, but on corruption. It's such an interesting topic, looking at how people abuse power. And it connected like the international development work that I'd done, where it felt like there was unequal distribution of resources or goods, and then you're looking at the human rights, which is all about people violating each other's, using their power to violate each other's rights. And then you have this anti-corruption element, where you have people in power that were using laws and businesses and different mechanisms to steal resources, in a huge way. And my particular area that I worked on a lot was on money laundering and the use of shell companies, and the UK and rich countries' roles in taking resources from other countries. So we tend to think that corruption is a kind of African issue or a Chinese issue or even a Russian issue, without looking at the role that UK banks play, or the way that the City of London plays, or lawyers or accountants. And so a lot of my work was, again, trying to introduce standards on a international level that could trickle back down and require greater transparency, accountability and integrity from governments and businesses.
And then you sort of moved into the sports field in terms of, you were head of public policy at Sport Integrity Global Alliance. I think that's the right name, isn't it? Were there any issues, I guess big issues around sport and integrity that were a surprise to you at the time?
So I think for me a watershed moment was, and this is the start of my journey into football, I think. So I was working at Transparency International when the FIFA scandal hit in 2015, and it wasn't a surprise to me, partly because I was doing lots of work on money laundering and corruption, and I could see how an organisation that had removed itself from other accountability measures could become embroiled in corruption scandals. But I also wasn't surprised because I had already come across lots of women playing football internationally, because I'd moved around so much, who had first-hand accounts of corruption. One particular woman that I met, her story will always stick in my mind. It sounds quite minor, but I think it was quite big for me. She was in Lebanon, and her team had won the league or won the cup, and they were in the changing room after the game, and her team was celebrating because they didn't have that much money, and so they were like, what are we going to do with this cash? You know, they'd literally been given cash, like, we can spend it on a new kit, or we can do this, or we can do that. And then a man walked in from their football association, took the envelope of cash and said, I'll look after this for you, and just walked out. And of course they never saw the money again. When I heard this story, I was so angry. Like, how dare that guy do that? Like, what motivated, what allowed him to think that he could walk into that room with all those women and just take the thing that they had rightfully won on their own terms? And so those kinds of stories I was hearing a lot. And when the FIFA corruption scandal hit, everything was just so much clearer to me. By that time, you know, I'd played competitively for, you know, about 20 years or so, but everything was so difficult. Everything, from the lack of opportunity. So for me, living on the Isle of Wight and no girls' teams, to having people make decisions about whether I was allowed to play in a tournament or not, to whether I was wearing a kit that fitted me or not. You know, all those decisions, and like, where does the resources come from? Where did the money come from? Why is there no investment in girls' football? Why is there no investment? All these decisions were being made by men that all looked the same and sounded the same and didn't really care at all about me. So I think for me, the FIFA corruption scandal was really big, and I thought there's some really serious injustice here. I guess the FIFA corruption scandal for me was my personal life and my professional life smashed together.
Yeah, absolutely. And in 2017, you helped establish Equal Playing Field. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit of the story behind the charity and setting it up?
Yeah, so at about this time, I realised that I was getting quite angry. And so, you know, my work was very international, flying around a lot, and I'm very deeply committed to the issues. But I couldn't get rid of this niggling feeling about why it was so unfair. The lack of investment, the lack of opportunity, the lack of respect for women in sports, and particularly football. And I suddenly realised that I wasn't the only one that was angry. Because I'd lived so internationally, paths crossed, and I ended up becoming good friends and quite close with a bunch of other women who also
fantastic angry women.
Yeah. And you know, suddenly, and two women in particular who really founded Equal Playing Field, and I came on a little bit afterwards, Laura Youngson and Erin Blankenship. So the two of them had this crazy idea to do something phenomenal that no one could kind of class as like a B version of men's sport, you know, that kind of brackets women type thing. And they wanted to set a Guinness World Record. So, you know, it's once and for all, we'll show them, we'll do something phenomenal, and it'll be great, and we'll have made a statement. And so we decided to climb to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. It took us about 6 days. And once we got to the top, having had this horrible climb in the dark for like 5-6 hours in the rock and the ice, we set up a full-size pitch and played a full 90-minute game at the top. It was a really rubbish game, really poor standard. It was 0-0, you know, and you kind of gasping for air.
But a full game?
Full game, yeah. So in order for it to be a Guinness World Record, it had to be a full 90 minutes, it had to be a full-size pitch, it had to have regulation goalposts, and we had to have FIFA referees. And so all the referees and all the officials were also women, and the women that we worked with, we were from all over the world. So we had players from Saudi Arabia, from Mexico, from Canada, France, Tanzania, Nepal, you know. And we had some former professional players. We had a former US international, former Canadian international, former French international, former England player, Victor Unit, as well as grassroots players. And it was really important for us that it was not only elite players as well as grassroots players, but they were from all these different countries and all these different religions as well, and backgrounds. And yeah, it was fantastic. And it was while we were climbing, I mean, there's obviously no mobile phones or anything, and there's no network. So you have really good, long conversations. Yeah. And we realised that this was the start of something, not the end. And so at that time, Equal Playing Field was our kind of band name. It wasn't an actual, we hadn't set up, we hadn't done anything. Yeah, we've now got 4 Guinness World Records to our name. So we do these big events, but it's not really about the event, it's about bringing these people together.
And awareness.
And awareness, getting a bit more media attention for the cause, I guess. But the last one that we did was in Lyon during the Women's World Cup, and we got 2 Guinness World Records actually, one for the largest number of nationalities in a single game, so I think we had about 60 different nationalities. Wow. And the other one was for the biggest 5-a-side game ever, so obviously it's 5-a-side but you can have roll-on subs. And so we had 822 players play over the course of 3 days, night and day, non-stop. It couldn't stop during the heat wave in France, which was shocking. But the whole point was we brought all these players from around the world, and we had run these workshops, and we had a summit where we brought people together. So it was very much like catalysing ideas and people taking ownership of what they were going to do when they go home. Things like film and photography, like how can you capitalise on this back in Mexico to get sponsorship? We also had grassroots coaching sessions, a big mix of, get together, get all this energy together, and then like go back out to the different countries around the world.
And we do talk a lot, don't we, about the difficulty of young women in Britain in terms of playing football and access to football. But clearly, women elsewhere in the world face much, much larger challenges. And I know, again, FIFA, UEFA have these huge figures showing massive growth and participation, but that doesn't really tell the whole story. So what do you think? Who's missing out on football at the moment?
I think the first thing that everyone needs to know is that there is women's football everywhere.
Yeah,
and, when I first went to Tanzania aged 17, 18, I played for a team out there, and I had the most wonderful season playing for my team, getting to a National Cup final in a stadium that had 3,000 people cheering along. So in some ways, I don't want anyone to think that, there's around the world, there's nothing happening, because actually in some ways what I saw was these incredible women out there that were facing a lot of social pressure not to play football. But they were training every day despite that. So they were super strong. They were super strong women.
And well supported, bigger crowds than some of the...
Yeah, I think in some ways the crowds were... Well, again, it was all really fascinating because, the crowds would gather kind of to jeer. And then bit by bit as the game went on, they were cheering. The jeers had turned to cheers. And I think that's the magic around a sport, and also the power that sport can have, because those people have come and specifically were wanting to laugh at these women, and then were wrapped up in the game, because you can't watch a game and not get into it. Yeah. So there was a bit of a power there. A lot of the players there are dealing with pressure from parents, from family members, from society. I mean, I also played in Rwanda for a while, and sometimes people would just line the place where you were playing and just laugh and shout at you. But I've also had that experience in England where boys that might be younger than you are just shouting insults at you. So I think there's commonalities. I think it's really important that we realise that there's commonalities across the world in these challenges that we face, which is why we talk about opportunity, equality, respect. They're the same challenges, just to different degrees. I think there are structural issues where you have federations that are not supporting their women's team, not investing. It's the easiest budget line to steal, isn't it? Especially when there's such little scrutiny and such poor governance in some of the football associations around the world as well. It's the easiest pot to steal from.
So you joined Lewes FC, so less than a year ago now, I think. July, and it coming up to. So what took you from working in this big global anti-corruption role to working in women's? I'm sure you've been asked many times. I'm going to ask you again.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of my old colleagues and even my family members are like, what are you doing? You had this career where you were like at the UN and the G20 and doing all this stuff, and now you're running a football club. Sorry, what? First of all, Lewes is really special. I wouldn't be at another football club. I think what Lewes is trying to do is revolutionary. A couple of months after I came back from the mountain, Kilimanjaro, in 2017, I heard on social media this plucky little club that had taken the decision to split its revenue equally between the men and the women. A lot of people talk about pay parity, but it's actually a lot more than that. It's so yes, our playing budgets are the same, but actually it's about splitting the revenue equally. So we have the same marketing budgets, for example. People get hung up on equal pay, but if you have the same marketing budgets, we both play on the same pitch, we have the same training facilities. When decisions are made, it's not a case of what do the men want and then what do the women want. It's a case of having everyone around the table and deciding what happens. But I saw this club do this thing, introducing equal pay, and I just thought, wow, so many people talk about it, and this little club has just decided to do it. And I remembered the club because I was like, that's Lewes. Is that the team that I played against, 20 years ago? So I kept my eyes on them. And in fact, what I did at that time was, I just supported what they were doing, this whole principle of it. But also, you could become an owner of the club. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, this club is also 100% fan-owned. And so immediately I clicked and just became an owner in 2017. And I remember thinking to myself, I'll probably never go down. I'm not really interested in the results, but I just want them to know that I back them. And I can do that by paying £40 a year. Brilliant. Okay, fine. It's one of those things where sometimes, you give to charity or you do something because you can't do much else, but you know that you can do that. And so that's how I felt at the time. I mean, I honestly never, ever thought that I'd ever end up working here. But then I guess from then, and with Equal Playing Field, my paths started to cross every so often with Lewes because they were being revolutionary. So the first time I met them face to face was at a meeting with Twitter, who were backing our world record attempt in France. And so they said, we're also supporting this club, Lewes FC. And I was like, can I meet them? And so we had a meeting together, and that was my first time that I met them. And so it was only earlier in 2019, it was about this time last year actually, that I got a phone call saying, hey, would you be interested in maybe taking over the general manager role? And I remember I just laughed. I said, no. A bit like, when I think about it, a bit like when I was asked, do you want to get a scholarship to play in America? I was like, no, that's not what I do. I'm this other thing.
And you've got the role of general manager.
Yeah.
So first of all, was that a new role? And what is that role? What is your day-to-day?
Yeah, so the general manager, it's quite specific to women's football in the UK. But you also see general managers in the US for football clubs, for soccer clubs. So the classic manager that everyone knows, is stood by the side of the pitch, shouting and screaming. So it's the off-pitch equivalent. Right. So I work really, really closely with our manager. He deals with the team and he deals with, obviously, the tactics. I don't get any say on that. I'm in the back room kind of dealing with, some of it is just how to run a team. So transfers, contracts, they're all staff. They're members of staff, right? So you just have to manage that side of it. But also you're looking, you have loads of requirements to fulfill as part of the league. So where the women are in the championship, we have very high standards that we need to adhere to maintain our license. So there's legal issues, but also there's, the sponsorship, marketing. The thing with Lewes was that they were very clear that they wanted a general manager that was also going to be outspoken on the gender equality things.
I got that.
Yeah, and so they said that's why they approached me. It was kind of like, we want you to run the club, but we also want you to. We're going to support you. So I have a brilliant assistant general manager, Lynn, and the idea was that she will help with a lot of that side of the work, so that you are able to then push for things to be forward thinking of them, isn't it? To invest in that. Super forward thinking in everything that they do. And Lewes gets talked a lot about, again, on the equality side and the pay parity, but actually we do a lot more than that. We were approached to receive funding, we were approached for sponsorship from a gambling company.
It's one of my questions in a moment, so great that you're...
Yeah, so, and we rejected it. We refused to take any gambling money, and instead what we did was we put a charity called Gambling with Lives that supports families who have lost loved ones to suicide, which has been related to gambling. So we put their logo on our shirts instead. And at the moment we're working with parliamentarians to bring in a charter that we would ask as many clubs around the country to sign, that says that they will not take money from gambling companies, but also a range of other things that I think that lots of clubs could sign up to, because the normalisation of gambling in this country and its link to football is astounding, and it's Yeah, well, it's fast as well. I mean, if you even go back 10 years ago, you didn't see as much gambling advertising at all. But now more than 50% of the clubs in the Premiership and the Championship have shirt sponsors that are gambling, let alone the stuff around the side of the pitch, and let alone what you see in computer games, because it transfers over into computer games as well. So we've seen this gradual spread. You know, there's 10-year-olds that are not allowed to gamble, but for them gambling is a very normal, natural part of their football experience.
I recently set up Twitter for the Game Changers podcast, and I put in women's sport, blah, blah, and then Twitter gives you all the recommendations of people you should follow. The first 10 are all betting companies, because I had the word sport in the profile.
Right.
Anyway, so yes, to reinforce the shock, and just everywhere.
Yeah, I'm a bit... I think that sometimes football can sleepwalk into stuff, and that's what I'm always sensitive to on the women's game as well. What are we doing that we could do differently to avoid us being in a situation in 5 or 10 years' time when we look back and go, oh, if only we thought differently, we could have done things, because we don't have to follow the rules. We don't have to follow the same rules that men's football is followed. A lot of people are disillusioned with football, with men's football, and we have this amazing chance to do things differently.
To reshape. And you talked about Lewes in the last 10 years or decade, and so many campaigns they've been involved with. So where does that come from, the core of those people that have been shaping that?
Well, I think there's probably a few things. The directors are brilliant. They're visionary. They believe genuinely in the power of football for social good. I think a lot of people talk about it, but I think they genuinely see it and then try to live that as well. But also, I think the very town of Lewes has a huge role. It's a rebellious town. It's well known for its bonfires. I mean, the population is 17,000, but it has 7 bonfire societies and blows everything up in a rebellious action in November. And
it's beautiful as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's kind of known to be this slightly progressive, edgy, quirky town that no one really understands why it is the way it is. And people are incredibly proud of the club. And vice versa, the club's incredibly proud of the town, and the town is proud of the club, and it's got a symbiotic nature and relationship. And I think that's also why a club that's fan-owned works with Lewes, because people are really proud to support something that they stand for. And so we have owners in about 1,500 owners across 26 countries.
I'm an owner.
Yes, fantastic. Yeah, it's a bit like how when I became an owner in 2017, I was like, I like the principles and values, I back you. And we've seen that now with other people around the world popping up and saying, yeah, we back you too. So. And talking of, I guess, money and some going professional, does that ownership stop you from having some rich magnate waltzing in with a large, it wouldn't be a checkbook now, would it really, but funding to transform the club? Yeah, and I think that's brilliant. You know, if there are some shady billionaires out there that want to give us money, you're not welcome. And of course, I need more money. We have so much ambition and so much potential, and we know that we need money to take us to that next level. But we're only going to take good people's money, and we're not going to compromise our values to get there, because then we've not achieved anything. The hypocrisy would be terrible. So I think we are looking for partners. We're looking for people that want to be part of this. We already punch above our weight. You know, we're not crazy. We know that it's like Lewes who. People, when they read out our draw in the FA Cup, don't even know how to pronounce us. And Lewes FC is a terrible name for a football club. But, you know, it's we are already in a league with, you know, Aston Villa and Leicester City and Crystal Palace and Blackburn Rovers, and then it's Lewes, you know. So we're already doing that. But imagine if we could get promoted into WSL. You know, we played Arsenal a couple of weeks ago, and the visibility around that in the FA Cup was great for a club like us, but we can't help but think, hey, we want to be doing that every week. And we also know that it doesn't cost that much, you know, to run women's football clubs in this country at the moment for these sponsors is cheap. And we are also not blind to the fact that at any point any of those big Premiership clubs could turn on the tap and really invest in their women's team in a way that we can't just turn on a tap. So yeah, we're holding ourselves back. We won't take any dirty or compromised money, and we won't be able to turn on a magic tap. So we just have to do it differently.
The right people. So in the show notes, I'll put details of where other people can become owners too, and I guess then keep spreading the word in terms of sponsors and partners for the future too. And do you feel, obviously, the profile of the club and all you're doing, has that brought more pressure this season to perform because there is, you raise profile and there's more of a spotlight on you?
Yeah, definitely. We have the opportunity to prove the concept of equality. So we're already, like I say, we're already punching above our weight, but if we're really able to perform on the pitch, win the league, or have a great cup run, then we get to show people that when you invest equally into your women, amazing things can happen. I think that for me personally, I feel a lot of pressure, like I really want this to work. And I'm also aware that some people would like us to fail. That's great. I mean, that's fine. Some people would like us to fail. I was very aware of that when we went into the game against Arsenal a few weeks ago, because we'd been very vocal on calling out the disparity in prize money for the FA Cup. And I'm also very well aware of the fact that Arsenal are a brilliant football team and could beat us 8-9, 10-0. So I was doing interviews before the game and thinking to myself, we're putting ourselves out there. And I was telling myself, be brave, Maggie, don't be compromised just because you might lose badly. And I was so proud of the team and of our fans, who are really vocal, and on TV all you can hear are the Lewes fans. And I was so proud of them, and I was really proud that we'd done ourselves proud. There's lots of pride in there, isn't there? It's just they did such a great job, and I was a little bit aware of the fact that would keep off some of the trolls for a little bit longer.
I was going to move on to this. So your campaign for equal prize money across the FA Cup has generated the most incredible coverage. So can you tell us a little bit about why you feel that's necessary?
Yeah, I mean, for me it's obvious. For others it isn't. So
it seems more obvious. The more I read, and whether it's your post or that you've shared, it's like does feel like it's so...
Yeah, so I think that people are happy with the idea that men should win more money than women. I'm not happy with that, but I can understand that lots of people will come in with all their arguments as to why that should remain the case. I think though that they weren't quite aware of just how big the gap was until we started talking about it. When we went into our fourth round FA Cup game, if I remember correctly, we won £2,000, but if we were male, we would have won £180,000. Now, I told you, I can win the league with £180,000. I can improve our facilities and our infrastructure. I can provide even better coaching to 100 of our girls in our pathway if you give me £180,000 for a single game. But I've got £2,000, so okay, fine. That goes towards our away travel for a game that was cancelled, Then the next game against Arsenal, we could have won £3,000, but the men were set to win £360,000. It's not just the number, it's also the fact that the men's side, they keep doubling the prize money, but for us, we're going up in smaller increments. So it's who makes the decision about not just the prize money, but also the incremental jumps?
Sorry, who does make that decision? It was the FA, but where does that sit?
I don't actually know. That's on my list of things to find out.
I'm talking to Kelly later. Perhaps there's a question for Kelly.
Yeah. There's loads of people that come back and say, well, there'll be an argument about, well, there's more men's teams in the FA Cup. So I quickly did the numbers and I was like, okay, that's fine. The total prize pot at the moment is £250,000 or £300,000 for the women's, for all of the teams. So just by doing the quick maths, I realised that if that argument was to hold, then I think the prize pot should be 8 million. So I was like, okay, fine, we can go up to 8 million if that's what you'd like. And then you look at some of the other arguments, and they'll talk about revenue, or they'll talk about, well, you'd kill grassroots men's football if you took away the money. And actually, 80% of the men's FA Cup money goes into the last few rounds where the Premiership teams are playing. So it's not actually the grassroots.
But they need it.
Right, yeah, I know. And then someone said, yeah, but you'll kill the FA Cup. You'll kill the FA Cup for men. You can't just halve their money. And then we pointed out that actually 2 years ago in 2018, the prize money was exactly that. It was exactly half. And 2 years ago, the decision was taken to double the entire men's pot to more than 30 million. So the women have 300,000, the men have 30 million. I mean, it's
not laughable, but it is extraordinary when you hear it.
Yeah, and I think it's just like we have to be really aware of this. We're not blind to the fact that women's football doesn't generate yet as much money in revenue and broadcasting. But then there hasn't been any investment. How can I generate bigger crowds, or how can I go on a marketing drive if I've just won £2,000 in my FA Cup? If I had £180,000, I tell you, yeah, exactly. I think we have this idea that men's football got to the size it is all by themselves, and that's not the case. They've had huge amounts of investment, public money, taxpayers' money, your money, my money, for decades, in the use of public facilities and the use of grants, public grants and things. So, even Wembley Stadium hosts so many more men's sports fixtures than women's, but it got £120 million of taxpayers' funds just a couple of years ago. So our money is constantly being skewed towards investing in the men's football, and we're just getting pennies, and we've got so much potential.
And what did you hope to achieve with the campaign this year? And having met you, I don't feel you're done yet. So I guess what's the plan for, how do you build upon this year's awareness?
I think that what I would like to do is find out who else is on board and wants to work with us on this. We got a lot of support from different clubs who were wanting to kind of figure out what they could do to help. I don't really know what the answer is. But I think it's something that has to be addressed quite soon, because the numbers just can't stay the way that they are. Yes, I'm looking for the allies, looking for the people that want to be a part of this. The prize money is something that is quite good for a football club to get behind. There's loads and loads of inequalities in women's football and in sport. That's like representation of women in the media or whatever it might be. But the one thing that a football club and football clubs could really get behind is something like the prize money, because it's
so clear. It's such clarity, isn't it, in the messaging, but also in the numbers. When I've seen your posts in terms of the clarity of the numbers, you can't argue with those numbers.
Well, people do. But yeah, I think we just need to shift somehow. I think that what I would like is, if we agree that the current divide, which is it's less than 1% of what the men earn. If we agree that that isn't good, but if we also agree that we're not quite ready for equal prize money, which Lewes would say, well, we'd step out of that. But when should the prize pot be equaled? I'd be willing to have that conversation and say, okay, well, it's going to be 2040. Okay, well, what do we do in order to get us there in 2040? But at the moment, there's nothing. It's just that's just the way it is. I think that no one can think that the current status quo is okay. Trying to find the markers, trying to figure out how do we get to the equal prize money.
Excellent. Watch this space. Yeah. So we've obviously seen the rise in athlete activists and the likes of Megan Rapinoe in the States. Are you a fan of her and all she's done for the game so far?
Yeah, I think she's wonderful, wonderfully inspiring on the pitch, off the pitch. She is an individual. She's taken such an intersectional lens as well. So, she is a white woman that took a knee in solidarity with Colin Kaepernick. Yeah. She calls out racism, homophobia. She's taking a stance on so many issues. She is so brave. But also, I'm really impressed with the knowledge and the wisdom that the other players on the US women's national team display. I don't like them. I wanted England to beat them in the World Cup, but you have to admire their staunchness, and it takes bravery.
And would you like to see more of the England women's team taking a stand and being more vocal about inequality in sport?
Yeah, of course I would. You see some players, not necessarily in the England team, but you do see some players that are starting to speak up and be quite vocal. I also don't blame them if they don't, because they're in a very difficult position. Even for me, I'm so far away from being a professional player, but I only became really active once I'd kind of stopped playing competitively, because then you can look back and go, okay, those are all those things. That was actually systematic. Because when you're in it, it's just things that are popping up that you're like, oh, that's strange. But you're trying to get into the first team.
You're trying selection to, and
you're just trying to, and then you're trying to get selected for England, and then you're trying to keep your position, and then you want
to be a troublemaker.
Exactly, you're in a really difficult position. So I don't blame them at all, and I bet you that a whole bunch of them will be much more outspoken once they've retired, which is totally natural.
And finally, with your years of experience, what advice would you give to young aspiring female leaders perhaps coming into football or into women's sport generally? Or into sport generally, I should say.
Something that I think is really important is for young women to know themselves, know what they stand for, know what they like, know what they don't like, and be comfortable with their own decisions. I feel like when you're a teenager or a young woman, you're often being shepherded towards being the same, like liking the same things that your friends like, finding yourself in situations that you feel like you should be there to please someone or to please something. Yeah, and I think that the quickest that we can kind of get rid of that and have people that are comfortable with what they like, what they don't like, who they are, the more that they will be able to identify their principles and values. And once you know what your principles and values are, you just have a code to operate by. And you see that with individuals, but you also see that with a club like Lewes. So for Lewes, when that betting company came in, it was easy. It was like, well, here's our principles and values. No, we don't want the money. If you're not clear on what your principles and values are, then you're going to spend a long time prevaricating over whether you take the money or not. And so I think once you're quite clear with yourself, then it's just easier to take decisions. I think, the last thing is just being brave. I think I've had this instinct, which has always been to say yes to things that will take me out of my comfort zone. And I think that that's crucial. So I've said this to some teenage girls as well, as like when an opportunity comes up and your instinct to say no, say yes, and then figure out later how to do this thing that you've agreed and you've signed up for. Because I think you just push yourself.
How inspiring is Maggie, and what's not to love about all that Lewes FC are doing to drive social change in society? As I mentioned in the podcast, anyone can become an owner of a club. I've put more details of how you can do this in the show notes, so why not join me and Maggie supporting Lewes FC in all it's doing to change the world? If you're enjoying the Game Changers, it would be brilliant if you could take a moment to review and rate the podcast. These ratings make a massive difference to how the podcast is ranked on iTunes and other platforms, and impact how likely other people are to see them promoted. It also makes me incredibly happy to hear that people are enjoying them. Thanks again to Barclays for supporting this series of the Game Changers and helping us to spread the word about these incredible women in football. You can find out more about all my guests from the previous series at www.promotepr.com/gamechangers. And also thanks to Sam Walker from What Goes On Media, who's been my hugely supportive, fabulous executive producer for the Game Changers podcasts. Next week, I'll be talking to women's football trailblazer Kelly Simmons MBE. Kelly took up the new role of Director of the Women's Professional Game at the FA in September 2018 to help deliver and transform professional women's football in England. She now oversees the FA Women's Super League, FA Women's Championship, the FA Women's National League and the Women's Pyramid of Football.
Well, we've got some big ambitions with the clubs about what we think we can achieve with the Women's Super League and the Women's Championship and really build professional women's football, and I am convinced that we can make it sustainable over the next 5-7 years, and that would be something that I don't think any women's team sport, maybe outside of basketball in America, has achieved, and that would be phenomenal.
The Game Changers. Fearless women in football.